Buenos días, ¿cómo están? Muy bienvenidos a Washington para aquellos que recién llegaron ayer y bienvenidos también al Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo. Quiero darles la bienvenida a este Segundo Foro Internacional, Fortalecimiento de la Gestión Fiscal Subnacional, Experiencias y Lecciones Aprendidas, que por supuesto hace parte de la Red de Descentralización y Gestión Fiscal Subnacional de América Latina y el Caribe. Para aquellos que querían una Navidad adelantada, ya les hemos conseguido un poquito de nieve, espero que la disfruten. Antes de comenzar quería comentarles que tenemos audífonos y traducción simultánea en inglés, español y portugués, y que se sientan libres de intervenir y hablar en su idioma nativo cuando quieran. Y primero que todo quiero darle la bienvenida a Vicente Fretes, que es el jefe de la División de Gestión Fiscal del BID, que se encuentra aquí con nosotros. Entonces, arrancamos directamente con Vicente, así que te damos la bienvenida, Vicente.
Gracias, Andrés. Buen día a todos y a todos. Me alegro que hayan podido llegar al banco. Para aquellos que están no acá en Washington especialmente. Y para mí es un gran placer y honor contar con la presencia de todos ustedes en este Segundo Foro Internacional de la Red de Descentralización y Gestión Subnacional de América Latina y el Caribe. La presencia de todos ustedes ratifica la creciente importancia que tiene la descentralización fiscal y los gobiernos subnacionales en la región. Efectivamente, en esta oportunidad saludamos la presencia de 21 diferentes entidades que representan a 14 países de la región, que a su vez representan el 90% de todos los gobiernos subnacionales de América Latina y el Caribe. Saludamos la reciente incorporación a la red de Ecuador mediante el Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas y de Paraguay a través de la Subsecretaría de Estado de Administración Financiera. Bienvenidos a ambos. En esta oportunidad, el foro tocará el tema de fortalecimiento de la gestión fiscal subnacional, experiencias y lecciones aprendidas. Antes de comentar sobre la relevancia que tiene la importancia y el fortalecimiento de los gobiernos subnacionales para nuestros países, quiero destacar que el tema del foro fue definido por los miembros de la red durante la reunión del Grupo de Diálogo Técnico realizado el año pasado, aquí en Washington. Consecuentemente, este encuentro se caracteriza por responder a una necesidad concreta de las entidades que hoy están presentes aquí. La División Fiscal del Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo ha prestado especial atención al proceso de descentralización que ha estado ocurriendo en nuestra región de manera gradual. Desde la década de 1980 hasta el día de hoy, se ha duplicado la participación de los gobiernos subnacionales en el gasto público consolidado, llegando hasta alrededor de un 25% en la actualidad y hasta cerca del 50% en algunos casos en ciertos países más descentralizados. Asimismo, sabemos que los avances en el proceso de descentralización han puesto de manifiesto la urgente necesidad de fortalecer a los gobiernos subnacionales para que estos cumplan con sus responsabilidades en la provisión de bienes y servicios públicos, especialmente en áreas tan importantes como la educación o la salud y en el desarrollo de los territorios de los países. En ese contexto, el evento que nos reúne hoy, es muy importante para dialogar sobre las experiencias concretas que tenemos para mejorar la capacidad de los gobiernos subnacionales, especialmente en los siguientes aspectos. Primero, mejorar la gestión de los ingresos propios, orientada a reducir la dependencia de las transferencias. Segundo, mejorar la calidad del gasto subnacional que nos permita hacer más con lo mismo o inclusive más con menos. Tercero, promover la transparencia y la rendición de cuentas. Y cuarto, mejorar la gestión fiscal subnacional en el marco de reglas de responsabilidad y sostenibilidad fiscal. Debemos también considerar que los gobiernos subnacionales deben enfrentar retos emergentes, entre los que se encuentra, por ejemplo, la adopción de nuevas tecnologías para mejorar la eficiencia y la efectividad de los servicios, el acceso a nuevas fuentes de financiamiento manteniendo la responsabilidad fiscal, abordar el tema de cambio climático y, por último, hacer un mejor uso de las transferencias para promover un crecimiento territorial equilibrado. Desde el BID queremos contribuir a estos esfuerzos facilitando un espacio para el intercambio de experiencias concretas y reflexionando sobre todo el aprendizaje que resulta de los programas orientados a mejorar la gestión fiscal subnacional de manera tal que sea más eficiente y efectiva. Sabemos que este proceso es complejo y está sujeto a situaciones históricas y a factores políticos, pero creemos que las experiencias, tanto a nivel regional como internacional, pueden proponer importantes lecciones a ser aprendidas y a ser aplicadas. Este foro, por lo tanto, nos da una importante oportunidad para que cada uno de nosotros contribuya al intercambio de experiencias y a un diálogo técnico y de políticas que resulte de gran relevancia para la región. Quiero, además de felicitarlos por estar aquí y demostrar el compromiso a través de su presencia hoy con nosotros, y deseo el mayor de los éxitos en estos 2 días del evento y en la gestión de la actividad de la red. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos.
Muchas gracias, Vicente. A continuación quiero darle la bienvenida a Philip Kiefer, que es el asesor económico principal del sector de instituciones para el desarrollo aquí en el banco. Bienvenido.
Buenos días a todos. Quería sumarme a la cordial bienvenida que les ha ofrecido Vicente, y también por parte de nuestra vicepresidente Ana María Rodríguez y nuestro gerente Juan Antonio Ketterer, ambas quienes se encuentran fuera del país y no pudieron estar acá. Este esfuerzo es sumamente importante y quería recargar la trascendencia de esto en unos comentarios muy breves. Como bien señala, el marco sectorial que hemos desarrollado, dando nuestras ideas del diagnóstico del problema de descentralización en la región y unas soluciones que proponemos, esto de la gestión fiscal se resalta como un problema fundamental a la cual este diálogo se va a apuntar. Y es importante por razones que sienten los ciudadanos, porque afecta la calidad y cantidad de los servicios que ellos perciben por parte del Estado. Afecta la infraestructura de la cual depende la productividad económica de estas regiones subnacionales. Y afecta, por supuesto, la estabilidad fiscal de los mismos países. Y durante estos días de diálogo vamos a intercambiar ideas de cómo la gestión y la nueva tecnología puede apoyar a mejorar puede mejorar la gestión fiscal para justamente mejorar la calidad de los servicios, la infraestructura, la estabilidad de los países. Pero creo que hay una oportunidad más trascendental a la cual podríamos también apuntarnos, que es de alguna manera realizar la promesa de la descentralización que radica en 2 puntos súper importantes. La idea detrás de la descentralización, tanto en la realidad del mundo como en la teoría, es que de alguna manera, los gobiernos subnacionales deberían tener mayor información sobre las exigencias y necesidades de sus residentes, de las personas que viven en sus áreas. Y por otro lado, estos mismos ciudadanos que viven en esas áreas pueden ejercer un control mayor y mejor sobre sus gobernadores. Y son en estos dos supuestos que avanzamos con la descentralización y esperamos que tenga mejores efectos en el bienestar de los ciudadanos. Pero es difícil lograr estos beneficios, conseguir estas ventajas, si el financiamiento subnacional depende de transferencias nacionales. Es difícil si el gasto subnacional está fuertemente regulado por los gobiernos centrales. Y es difícil si los gobiernos centrales se responsabilizan para la fiscalización de las decisiones fiscales de los gobiernos subnacionales. Es simplemente un hecho de la vida, ¿no? Si bajo estas circunstancias hay poco espacio para que la información que tengan los gobiernos subnacionales sobre las exigencias de sus ciudadanos pueden responder a esta información, porque todo está regulado para que no puedan responder. O es difícil también que los ciudadanos tengan incentivos para controlar a sus propios gobiernos subnacionales, porque saben que el gobierno central está detrás de esto. O sea, va a ocuparse de este problema. Por tanto, sin los incentivos a nivel gobierno subnacional o a nivel ciudadano subnacional de aportar información, aprovechar información o controlar, estas ventajas que tiene la descentralización va de alguna manera desvaneciendo. Y es justamente esto que queríamos fortalecer, creo, a través de este diálogo sobre gestión y tecnología. Cómo podemos usar las nuevas modalidades de gestión y las nuevas modalidades de tecnología de alguna manera reforzar los lazos entre ciudadanos y sus gobiernos subnacionales. Y de hecho, hay mucha posibilidad de hacer esto. O sea, simplemente aportar información muy simple, muy básica, digamos, a los ciudadanos subnacionales puede tener efectos importantes en el comportamiento de los gobiernos subnacionales sin que haya cualquier tipo de intervención por parte de los gobiernos centrales. Hay evidencia de que simplemente diciéndoles a los ciudadanos que existe un programa importante a nivel municipal y cuáles son las promesas de los candidatos, digamos, a la alcaldía con respecto a este programa, de un día al otro, casi de una elección a la otra, resulta en mayor desempeño por parte de los alcaldes en este programa. Simplemente esta información súper básica. Entonces, para concluir, para casi cerrar y abrir, quería remarcar, no solo felicitar y remarcar una base de datos que Huáscar y su equipo han desarrollado sobre los gobiernos subnacionales y la situación fiscal de los gobiernos subnacionales en la región, que, por si acaso, sí subrayan algunas de las características que estoy mencionando, que de alguna manera desventajan la capacidad de alcanzar los beneficios de la descentralización. Por ejemplo, en Colombia hay los ingresos propios de todos los gobiernos municipales son solo 35% de sus ingresos totales. Y para los gobiernos subdepartamentales es aún menor, es 25%. Así que uno ve ya los problemas de incentivos que esto podría crear en la relación ciudadano-gobierno subnacional. Igual en Brasil, hasta en Brasil, que tiene un sistema de descentralización bastante fortalecido, solo 20% de los ingresos municipales son del propio municipio. Así que hay muchas razones para que haya tantas transferencias centrales. Por ejemplo, la equidad geográfica es un punto muy importante, una meta muy importante de la región. Solo tenemos que reconocer que esas transferencias, por su misma naturaleza, cualquier que sea su motivo, socavan un poco las metas que tenemos para la descentralización. Y ojalá, con las nuevas modalidades de gestión, de tecnología que estamos conversando estos 2 días, podamos lograr cerrar las brechas entre ciudadano y gobierno subnacional mientras mejoramos el comportamiento y el desempeño de estos mismos gobiernos subnacionales bajo este marco legal, regulatorio, constitucional que existe en la región ahora. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Philip. Y ya para cerrar, digamos, esta apertura del foro, quiero invitar a Óscar Eguino, que es el especialista líder y coordinador del área de descentralización y gobiernos subnacionales aquí en el banco y que todos ustedes conocen. Bienvenido.
Muy buenos días a todos, bienvenidos una vez más. Lo que voy a hacer yo en esta breve presentación es explicarles un poco cómo hemos estructurado este evento. Antes que nada, indicarles que los temas que estamos tratando han sido discutidos con todos ustedes, ¿no? Hemos tenido conversaciones para armar la agenda y es una agenda que ha sido construida con el aporte de todos los miembros de la red, lo cual agradecemos enormemente. Creo que ese es un tema que marca una diferencia, ¿no? Aquí estamos para dialogar y realmente compartir experiencias, que ese es el propósito de este evento en particular. Entonces, nuestro objetivo, pues, compartir experiencias y mostrar buenas prácticas, veamos qué podemos aprender en este diálogo que tenemos durante 2 días. ¿Cómo hemos estructurado la agenda? Básicamente, el primer día vamos a tener presentaciones de casos, de programas que consideramos emblemáticos, muy importantes. Un primer bloque va a estar dedicado al trabajo que hacemos con estados, mostrando 2 programas que son icónicos, muy importantes para el banco y para los países, el programa Profisco de Brasil y el programa de Fortalecimiento Provincial de la Argentina. Posteriormente haremos el mismo diálogo, pero llevando la discusión a nivel de los municipios, ¿no? Y tendremos la presentación de un programa de fortalecimiento de municipios en Uruguay y un programa de fortalecimiento de municipios en Brasil nuevamente. Eso es la parte de presentación de programas, que va a estar estructurada además de la siguiente forma. Siempre vamos a tener en el panel a un representante de los beneficiarios. O sea que estará un gobernador, estará un alcalde. Vamos a tener además una persona que representa a la contraparte del banco, los líderes del proyecto, los dueños del proyecto, y también la perspectiva técnica que va a ser brindada ya sea por un consultor o por un especialista en la materia. Entonces, ese es un poco el concepto de los paneles que vamos a tener inicialmente. Terminando la tarde, vamos a sacar la mirada de América Latina y ver qué está pasando a nivel internacional. Entonces, lo que vamos a hacer es tener una presentación sobre la experiencia de China. Vamos a tener una presentación de la OSD mostrándonos qué es lo que se está haciendo en la OSD en esta materia. Y además vamos a tener una presentación sobre lo que ocurre en los Estados Unidos. Nos está acompañando la gente del Government Finance Officers Association y ellos nos van a mostrar cómo en Estados Unidos se construyen capacidades de la gente que trabaja con finanzas a nivel de los estados y de los municipios. Entonces, ese día va a ser básicamente un día dedicado a recopilar información, ver lo que está ocurriendo en los otros países, compartir lecciones, compartir aprendizajes, ¿no? Y ver también lo que ocurre fuera de la región, particularmente observando lo que ocurre en la China, la OSD y los Estados Unidos. El segundo día es un poco diferente, porque en el segundo día lo que vamos a hacer es básicamente entrar ya a temas un poco más específicos. Y ahí, respondiendo a la demanda y a la solicitud de todos ustedes, vamos a presentar casos que son más puntuales. Por ejemplo, tendremos una presentación sobre gestión por resultados, tendremos una presentación del TADAT, que es un sistema para evaluación de administración tributaria, los CIAF subnacionales, normas internacionales de contabilidad subnacional y lo que es la inversión pública descentralizada. Son casos mucho más específicos, mostrando fundamentalmente la metodología metodología que se aplica para el diagnóstico en estas materias y ver cómo estamos empezando a trabajar o qué experiencias existen en fortalecer la gestión subnacional en estos temas específicos. Posteriormente vamos a tener un panel que considero que es muy importante sobre las lecciones aprendidas. Invitaremos nuevamente a los panelistas, a un representante de cada uno de los paneles de los programas específicos que se van a discutir para que hagamos un diálogo sobre qué estamos aprendiendo conjuntamente sobre cómo intervenir a nivel subnacional. Tendremos también un panel sobre el tema de capacitación. Usualmente lo que ocurre con el tema de capacitación en el diseño de los programas es que dedicamos un monto, $1 millón, $2 millones al tema de capacitación sin mucha definición de en qué se va a gastar. Y aquí vamos a tener una conversación sobre los diferentes instrumentos de capacitación que podemos aplicar en nuestros programas y cuándo conviene aplicar cada uno de estos instrumentos. Es decir, si queremos tener un impacto masivo, qué tipo de instrumento de capacitación tenemos que tener, si queremos tener una capacitación mucho más específica y técnica, cuáles son los instrumentos que se aplican en ese caso. Y finalmente, lo que vamos a hacer es abrir la discusión sobre el uso de tecnologías. Obviamente el tema de la tecnología cruza todos los temas que hemos discutiremos durante los 2 días, pero la última sesión estará más enfocada a ver los retos que nos impone la adopción de nuevas tecnologías y cómo podemos aprovecharlas para fortalecer la gestión fiscal subnacional. Ahí hay temas que son extremadamente importantes. Nuevamente respondiendo a la solicitud de ustedes, tenemos varias presentaciones y las vamos a hacer bastante cortas porque lo que queremos es que todos ustedes puedan realmente participar y mostrar los avances que tienen y que podamos alimentarnos de las experiencias de los diferentes países. Básicamente ese es el encuentro que tenemos. Es un encuentro fundamentalmente pensado en las necesidades de los países y las necesidades de ustedes. Y simplemente yo quiero agradecerles a todos por su contribución en armar esta agenda. Esta es una agenda en la cual todos han participado y creo que responde a las necesidades de nuestros programas y de nuestros gobiernos subnacionales. Esperemos que sea una discusión muy fructífera y bienvenidos a todos. Muchas gracias.
De apertura y quisiera pedirle a Teresa Terminacian, please, Professor Efisham Ahmad. Thank you very much. Are you both going to present in English? Yes. Okay. Ambos van a presentar en inglés o si alguien necesita los equipos de traducción. Creo que todos están en la mesa, ¿no? Y es bueno, el objetivo de esta sesión es básicamente presentar los principales desafíos de la gestión fiscal subnacional, por un lado, y por otro lado es presentar algunas estrategias para hacer frente a estos desafíos. Y cada uno de los expositores tiene 20 minutos. Each of the panelists has 20 minutes. And yes, because I see that. And I would like to ask Teresa Terminaci to start. She's former director of the fiscal department at the IMF.
Muchas gracias, Edna. Un placer estar aquí otra vez con todos ustedes. Me permito de hacer la presentación en inglés porque es más fácil para mí y creo que todos o casi todos se entienden de cualquier manera y tenemos excelentes traductores. Bueno, okay. So I'm going to switch to English now. First of all, I would like to emphasize that this presentation begins with some sort of big picture issues. what are the factors that affect the effectiveness of decentralization? And I'll argue that these factors have a lot to do or a lot to bear on the issue of subnational fiscal management, which is the main focus of the presentation. So the socio-political context, the institutions that govern the system of intergovernmental fiscal relation, and finally, more specifically, subnational capacity. Then I'll talk a little bit about what do we mean by subnational capacity, and more importantly, what do we know about subnational capacity development needs. And I will, and I think this is perhaps a little bit newer way of looking at the issue. I look both at the role of incentives and of resource constraints in capacity development. And I will emphasize that the other two factors that affect the effectiveness of decentralization, that is to say, the socio-political context and the institutions that govern the intergovernmental fiscal system, relate and affect the subnational capacity, and that there are interactions between these three factors. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about the role of intergovernmental cooperation in the development of subnational capacity, something that we already discussed somewhat in more detail yesterday in the technical group. And that was, to a large extent, at least one of the main focuses of last year's meeting of the RED. So, does decentralization enhance growth and welfare? According to the normative sort of first generation theories of fiscal federalism, the Thibault, Oates, Musgrave, etc., decentralization, as also Phil mentioned, is expected to improve welfare by allowing the population preferences to be better reflected in the choice and delivery of public services. The second generation theories of fiscal federalism emphasize more the socio-political context, the influence on the effectiveness of decentralization, and they point also to the fact that decentralization has the potential to improve growth and efficiency by fostering what they call yardstick competition between the subnational governments in the delivery of, in the efficient and effective delivery of public services. However, the empirical evidence on the impact of decentralization on both economic growth, its inclusiveness, and the quality of public services suggests that is very mixed, and suggests that the effectiveness of decentralization varies very widely, both among countries and within countries, as well as over time, reflecting a number of interrelated factors. And what are these main factors? First of all, socio-political factors. These have to do with the quality of governance. This was mentioned also by Phil before, in particular the transparency of government operations, the accountability of local officials, and the degree of citizens' involvement in civic life, which is also related to transparency and accountability. And also the absence of very large regional income disparities, because if these are very large, it is more difficult to have a decentralization which is effective, especially as regards decentralization of own revenues. Another factor that is very important is the design of intergovernmental fiscal relation, in particular, whether the assignment of spending responsibility is sufficiently clear, whether there so as the political accountability or accountability of local officials to their population is enhanced. The assignment to subnational governments of appropriate sources of own revenues is something we discussed at some length yesterday, and intergovernmental transfers that are sufficient to cover the ex-ante gap between the assigned spending responsibility and the own revenue assignments that are reasonably stable and predictable and that are appropriately equalizing. And finally, a well-designed and rules-based system of borrowing controls. These are the main characteristics of a system of intergovernmental fiscal relation that is conducive to effectiveness. And finally, and this is the topic of most of the rest of my presentation, the capacity of subnational governments to carry out effectively and efficiently their assigned responsibilities. So to exploit their own revenue sources in line with their potential, provide their citizens access to infrastructure and services of adequate quality, and manage responsibly their budgets and as well as their financial and non-financial assets and liabilities, which is something that is often overlooked. These three sectors of factors are interrelated. In particular, accountability and governance and the design of intergovernmental fiscal relation affect both the incentives and the resources to improve subnational capacity. And this is what I will discuss in some more detail in the following slides. But first of all, what do we really know about subnational capacity needs? The fact of the matter is that comprehensive, detailed, objective, and internationally comparable information about the capacity needs of subnational governments is really quite lacking. There is here a big agenda in terms of developing this type of information. Because the vast majority of indicators which are, say, diagnostics, which are based on systematic and indicators, objective indicators about government capacities, both in revenue policy and administration. For example, the IMF RA FIT and the TADAT, which will be discussed later in another session, and in expenditure policy and financial management, for example, the PIFA and the PIMA diagnostics, related to central governments, not to subnational governments. There are very few. I was looking at the PIFA set of indicator of diagnostics, and more than 2/3 relate to the national government. And in fact, as regards Latin America, there are really very few such diagnostics at the local and state, mainly the state government. Yesterday, Roberto Garcia Lopez mentioned that some analysis is now being conducted in the context of the various networks of the PRODEV to actually carry out these types of diagnostics, but this relates mainly to Latin America. For the most part, we need to rely on information or sources of information which are country-specific, often purely qualitative, sometimes even anecdotic, and these include surveys of opinions of users of subnational services or of central government officials, ad hoc studies covering one or more subnational governments. And some of these sources of information suffer what I call positive selection bias, because the subnational governments are more prepared to submit themselves to these kinds of analysis, are the ones that are, typically better and less likely to be to appear badly from an analysis of that sort. So in preparing this presentation, I looked at a number of these sources, and I tried to distill a bit of an overview of the findings. But I'm really looking forward to hearing in the next few presentations, case studies that show how these challenges are being addressed by the main Latin American countries. So beginning with some broad generalization. First of all, I would say that when we talk about capacity needs, we should be conscious of the fact that these evolve over time, because subnational governments are facing growing challenges that relate or stem from the trends in the socioeconomic environment. For instance, the dislocations caused by globalization and the related territorial shifts in demand and production, which make, for instance, some regions and cities fast-growing and others declining or stagnant. Migration flows, which put a lot of stress on social services in particular regions or cities. Changes in technology and the impact on labor markets, which, like the trends in globalization, can affect the labor market and therefore put additional stress on the local finances. Urbanization and agglomeration trends with the growth of the challenges posed by the growth of large metropolitan areas. And also the reduced tolerance by society for large disparities in access and quality of public services. All of these continue to put sort of growing stresses and increase the need for capacity development by subnational government. Generally speaking, subnational capacities tend to correlate positively with countries' level of development. But this is not always the case, because there are examples of quite progressive and advanced subnational government in terms of capacity, even in some relatively less developed countries. But these are, in general, there tends to be a positive correlation. The same tends to be true with the size of government. Although, for instance, we were hearing yesterday from Roberto that in their work they encountered a number of smaller localities which were quite a good example of use of their revenue sources and or of development of partnerships that allowed to increase these sources. And finally, again, capacities tend to be weak in rural and geographically isolated localities. So what are the main weaknesses on the revenue side? Well, it's, first of all, some weaknesses relate to the nature of the tax base, often affected by, as I mentioned, by dynamic developments in production and demand. The race to the bottom in the form of predatory tax competition among states or municipalities, weaknesses in tax administration and enforcement, which have to do with lack of information on the tax base, for example, limited taxpayer registers that don't cover, for instance, many of the informal businesses, and outdated property cadasters, cumbersome systems of tax collection, poor monitoring of tax arrears, a high degree of discretion in assessments, for example, in the assessment of property values and in the resolution of tax disputes, low skills of tax officials, and low use of modern IT. Again, these are broad generalizations. There are many cases we are going to hear in the next few days of quite advanced use of technology and of better, adequate skills of tax officials. But the majority, the vast majority of subnational governments suffers in one form or other from these weaknesses. Also, it's interesting that the few subnational governments which are especially large cities in advanced countries, exploit adequately the revenue-generating potential of their commercial assets, for example, land, buildings, and enterprises that they own. I like to quote one case, my own city of Rome in Italy. They have a huge stock of apartment buildings. Well, do you know what some of them charge? About 100 euros per month in rent. So this is just to give an example of what a waste of potential resources by not utilizing appropriately those resources. There are also, of course, many weaknesses in subnational expenditure policy and planning. Subnational multi-year plans often do not exist, and even if they do, they are not based on objective evidence of local needs and on realistic estimates of resource availability. Subnational plans often are not well aligned with national plans, and there are no effective mechanisms to reconcile the differences, which results in more limited access to subnational access to financing for investment, either in the form of capital transfers from the central government or to access to markets. Subnational governments often do not exploit the potential for synergies with their neighbors, which is particularly important in planning network infrastructures. Ensure that where your highway finishes, the next state highway begins, so that or in other types of such networks. And finally, most subnational governments lack medium-term expenditure frameworks to guide the annual budget process. Also, most subnational governments lack the capacity and the resources to carry out systematic reviews of their expenditure programs and priorities. There are also quite endemic weaknesses in the management of subnational public investments. First of all, and this is not only at the subnational level, but also at the national level, public investments tend to be the first victim of fiscal contractions because they are easier to cut than current spending. There is quite interesting empirical evidence of this, for instance, in the recent flagship publication of the IDB on spending better. Moreover, the management of subnational investments frequently suffers from a range of other weaknesses. For example, limited use of cost-benefit analysis in the evaluation of proposed projects. Although, you must say, in several countries in Latin America, subnational investment proposals are subject to a national filter of the SNP in the national system of investment projects. But the capacity of subnational governments to prepare projects that can pass the filter of the SNP is very dispersed and varies a lot across subnational governments, and often the ones that would be more in need because they are, for instance, in regions or localities that are relatively less developed are not able to present prepare and present such projects. And in that sense, as we will see, there is a real role for the government to help. Procurement processes that are insufficiently transparent and therefore are not conducive to the selection of efficient project proposals. And this, related to this, is then substantial delays, cost overruns, and need for renegotiation of contracts. There is also most subnational governments do not have, and this is also sometimes the case at the national level, do not adequately budget for operation and maintenance of new and existing infrastructure. There are also their incentive factors, because it's politicians prefer to devote resources to new investments that they can inaugurate rather than to the maintenance of the existing ones. Few subnational governments are able to carry out systematic ex-post evaluation of completed projects, and frequently they lack access to long-term financing through capital markets, and do not have the capacity to manage effectively the quite resource-intensive public-private partnerships. Yeah, oh my goodness, no. Okay, most intermediate and large governments follow relatively orderly and regular procedures for budget preparation. However, there are many weaknesses: poor quality of forecast, little or no risk analysis, poor monitoring and reporting of commitments and consequently of payment arrears, lack of unified treasury accounts, accounting rules and procedures that are not aligned with national and international standards, and more limited fiscal reporting. So scarcity of resources is frequently seen as the main constraint to the development of subnational capacities, but in reality, negative and positive incentives play an equally important role. Negative incentives are often the result of flaws in governance and in the design of intergovernmental fiscal system. Governance flaws such as the capture of subnational governments by local elites, lack of civic involvement, and a poorly functioning judiciary. And flaws in the intergovernmental fiscal relations system, we already discussed: lack of clarity in assignments, too much discretion in intergovernmental transfer, poorly designed equalization system, soft budget constraint resulting from lack of clear rules and limits on borrowing, and a lack of uniform national rules on accounting, reporting, and fiscal transparency. The central government can create positive incentives for subnational capacity through a clear assignment of expenditure responsibility and appropriate design of transfers, the development and use of appropriate indicators to monitor the effectiveness and efficiency of subnational spending programs, particularly those that are co-financed through earmarked grants, facilitating access to long-term financing for subnational investment that meet pre-specified quality standards, and the legislating minimum subnational standards for public financial management. The central government can also help the subnational governments to address the resource constraints, besides the incentive on capacity, by avoiding unfunded expenditure mandate, by creating effective coordination mechanism for concurrent spending responsibilities, by assigning to the subnational government appropriate sources of own revenues, by correcting regional disparities through well-designed equalization transfers, through the reform of the civil service that extends to subnational governments, by sharing taxpayer information with subnational tax administration, and by supporting through technical assistance and possibly financially improvements in subnational revenue administration and PFM. And finally, there is a role also for horizontal cooperation among subnational governments by avoiding or helping to avoid the race to the bottom in tax competition, by promoting exchange of information and know-how among subnational revenue administration. We will hear some examples of that in Brazil. By facilitating the identification and exploitation of potential synergies in infrastructures and in service delivery among neighboring localities, for example, in metropolitan areas through consortia, municipal consortia, and through exchange of good practices, lessons from successes and failure, and positive demonstration effects. And finally, by promoting and to the extent possible, coordinating the modernization of subnational IT systems in both revenue administration and PFM. So there is an important role to be played by intergovernmental fiscal cooperation, both vertical and horizontal, in addressing the weaknesses in subnational financial management. Thank you very much.
Professor. So, Matt is professor and senior researcher at the London School of Economics and the Chinese Academy of Fiscal Science, among other institutions.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Whilst they figure out how to load my PowerPoint, I'd like to say how pleased I am to be here today. And when I was in the IMF, my boss here used to complain that I travel too much. And, you know, it's true that last week I was in China. The week before that, I was in Europe, in Bonn, Berlin, and London. And today I managed to do something which has never happened before. I had a presentation this morning in Chennai, India, on financing inclusive cities, and 2 presentations in Washington. Well, fortunately, there are ways of doing these things, and I'm going to be a little provocative and talk a little bit about trying to do decentralization work and most recent experiences, particularly Mexico, in India, and China. And I've worked in many Latin American countries trying to do decentralization work in Peru, in Bolivia, in Colombia, as well as countries in Central America. So really what I'm going to talk a little bit here about is strategy. What are we talking about when we talk about strengthening financial management? Well, green button, she said, don't press the red button. I can't find the, oh, there's a red button, yeah. The big one. Oh, okay. Oops, no. I'll figure this out. Oh, the big one, sorry, I can't see. It must be the jet lag. I'm very interested nowadays on the nexus between policy and management. Really, this is critical. And quite often, lower levels of government are required to manage policies that they can't manage. And then it rebounds on the central government, cases in Mexico on education, on how do you deal with primary education, for example. So unfortunately, the traditional theories, whether they're first or second generation, actually don't help us all that much. And we were dealing with the decentralization of education issues in Mexico. And I'll talk a little bit about Mexico. It's fresh in my mind. It's also a country where we hope to do further work. So really, what you are also interested in, and if you're looking at Mexico, you're looking at China, you're looking at India, is investment for growth, for long-term growth, employment generation. Where is it going to happen? How does it happen? How do you manage that process? That the interrelationships between different levels of government become critical. But the management issues are designed with view to a theoretic model which may or may not be necessary, or may be actually a problem. And I'm going to talk about the institutional design, and then some experiences of work we're doing on simplifying both policy and administration by looking at new technologies. And here there's work in Latin America, there's work in China, there's work in Africa, and I'll talk a little bit about this, and you know, we have relatively little time. So really focus on the policy and management nexus. Quite often, you know, the policy, tax, administration, and PFM are not properly designed to take account of what the policy framework is. And quite often the policies are too complex to be administered, especially at subnational levels. And really what we've seen is, and indeed Teresa explained it very nicely, both in first and second generation model, you're looking at clarity in spending, you're looking at own source revenues, where the local government or the subnational government has control over the rates at the margin. Not that they have transfers or revenue shares. That's different. This is control over rates at the margin. And that you have some access to credit. These are the issues that you talk about, and we've all worked on these issues for decades now. The associated PFM or institutional arrangements are that you have decentralized budgets, simplified FMISs, you have SIAFIs at lower levels of government, very limited use of treasury single accounts. Mexico doesn't even have one at the central government level, and you can't monitor subnational operations. Particularly then you focus at subnational level on property taxes, spending lots of money on cadasters, huge amount of money on the management process, and then there's the whole issue of how you manage credit. So that's the framework you have linked to a model of decentralization which may not be correct. And really, I draw inspiration from two people who you know, Santiago Levy, whose book was greatly influential as far as I'm concerned, Good Intentions, Bad Outcomes. The focus on Social Security, the focus on financing Social Security through the nomina, which is the payroll tax, leading to incentives to cheat. And that's what we researched over the last 3 or 4 years in Mexico. Indeed, he was right. And my friend and former boss, Vito Tanzi, who's just written a fabulous new book. If you haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend it. And I've coined a new, Vito Tanzi is known for lots of Tanzi effects and Tanzi this and that. But there's a new Tanzi effect, which I'm called the Tanzi KISS effect. And KISS, in this case, is keep it simple, stupid. That's the result of his book. Keep it simple, stupid. So just keep that in mind, the Tanzi KISS effect. Unfortunately, we don't have simplicity. You have complex design in policies. You have overlapping expenditure responsibilities. You don't have clarity in the financing issues. So really, what you're looking at is effects on firms, effects on households, and effects on lower levels of government. It's not clear how these work out, whether it's in Mexico, it's in China, it's in India. And then you have reforms which are well-meaning. Talk about the Mexican 2013 reform, moving in the right direction, but creating a problem for subnational governments. The same problem in India, same problem in China. So really, you're looking at the interrelationship between reforms and policies. Not just a central government policy, it's the interrelationship between the central government, the states, and local governments, and how they come together. So you're really looking at a very important aspect, and increasingly important, this is again the Mexican case, incentives to cheat. Very important. So really by levels of government, by large taxpayers, and really that is something which is now politically extremely important in China, in India, and in Mexico. So really we're looking at universal problems given institutions and policies and the way they come together. So what Santiago Levy talked about was replacing the nomina by the VAT. The problem was that the Mexican VAT didn't generate revenues because it was full of holes. And fixing the holes in the VAT in 2013 involved eliminating the repecos, the small taxpayer regime, integrating it with the national tax regime. It did stop the cheating to some extent, and the tax GDP ratio has gone up from 10 or 11 to 17 in 3 years, which is phenomenal performance. But it has removed a tax handle. And it has not addressed the subnational nomina problem, which is what concerned Santiago Levy in the first place. China has done the same thing. It's integrated the VAT. But it takes away the business tax from the state and local governments and integrate it with the national government. So what is happening also in India is exactly the same process. You're integrating the VAT in order to get greater efficiency and improve the investment climate, but also generate information. If you have information on the whole value chain, it's harder for firms to cheat. So the big impact of the VAT reforms is actually on the income taxes, as we see in the Mexican case. So really, these are very nice reforms. The problem is that the models, decentralization models begin to break down because the on-source revenues no longer exist at the subnational level, are very hard to see. The property tax also doesn't work. So really, when you're also looking at spending responsibilities, and you see in Bolivia or in Peru that you go with the look at the HIPC regime, which I did in 2004, and ask what the Bolivian municipalities were doing in education and health, the answer was not very much. They were getting money for that. Same thing in Peru. The overlapping responsibility. What are lower levels of government responsible for? It's not clear. Not clear. So, and then you don't have full information on who does what, how the money is spent, what happens to it. So really you have the absence of full information. You don't have proper balance sheets. You don't have proper balance sheets in China. So you don't actually know what the local governments are doing. And they're borrowing money, which is not seen. So you can have an incipient problem building up if you're not careful. And in Latin America, with the single-term mandates, you have an even greater political economy problem, which I don't have time to go into now. I want to talk a little bit about the complexity. Really, if you have overlapping responsibilities and earmarks, I mean, Brazil is the best example of earmarks that you can think of. If you have an earmark system, you need to know in your CFE not only the full GFSM economic and functional classification, but also what governments spend on their own account, which is GFSM+. OECD tried to do that for some, in the OECD network for some advanced countries. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. It's very expensive, and if you don't actually know what people are doing on their own account, or what they should be doing on account of central government, you don't know that, you might as well just give them the money. So really, you're looking at a policy which can't be administered, and you're spending a lot of money on these CFEs without the proper chart of accounts. IDB, CAF, World Bank, so a lot of money being spent on CFEs. They're not able to capture either the GFSM in the charts of account, and certainly not the augmented GFSM that's needed if you're going to capture the overlapping responsibilities. You need that. You don't have it. So really, and then you don't have the balance sheets at the local level, which is also required under the GFSM format, because you've got opening balance sheet, you've got transactions, and you've got closing balance sheet, and you have the full accruals-based capturing of liabilities. You don't have that. You don't have it in China, you don't have it in Mexico. So how on earth are you going to find out that there is an implicit or incipient debt crisis occurring, certainly in China or in India? You see it through the non-performing loans of the banking system, which is what happened in Mexico in the 1990s, happened in Spain in 2008, what's happening now in India today. It's happening now. So it's also happening in China, as a matter of fact. So really, what you're looking at is a market information which doesn't often exist. So if you can hide liabilities, center can't actually distinguish whether you're spending on their account or your own account, your whole system breaks down. Your system's gone. The nice framework that Teresa correctly laid out doesn't work. So what do you do in terms of the investment strategy? Cooperating between jurisdictions, between city A and city B. They're saying, we had a conference in China last week, they're saying that Shenzhen should cooperate with Guangzhou, should cooperate with Zhuhai. Zhuhai has debts which are incredible. Why on earth should Shenzhen cooperate with Zhuhai? It's not going to happen because you don't know the liabilities. You don't know what the liabilities, you don't know the games that can be played across these jurisdictions. So if you're looking at an investment strategy and they're doing it right, thinking of a say, Silicon Valley type arrangement for innovation and growth, well, then you need a new institutional framework with proper responsibilities and financing and a balance sheet. So you're looking through how you create a sustainable hub. That's the story. You want to generate jobs in Chiapas or in Tabasco, you need to think about what they're going to do, how the investment at the national level is going to interact with local public services to generate the incentives for the private sector to come in and invest and generate jobs. So really, you're looking at a very complex set of issues, and it all comes together, but it's not easy. Now, looking at the problems with PPPs and infrastructure, et cetera, I did a couple of papers for the G24 groups of countries, which are available on the G24 website. Many of your countries are members. I will not have time to go into it. But the problem is that risks and liabilities are easy to hide. And you need the full balance sheets in order to make sure that you know what they're doing. China has stopped PPPs because they don't know what the local governments are doing. Stop them. India, with the private sector-oriented government, stop PPPs because the non-performing loans of the banking system now are $130 billion. It's coming through the state banks. So really, you have a huge problem. So if you have imperfect information, all sorts of gameplay across jurisdictions is possible. And that's really a problem for the decentralization model. So really what you need to do is to follow spending by all levels of government. You need your GFSM charts of accounts. I'm not going to have time to go into it. It's in the annex to this presentation. And you need to track the cash. So you need the cuenta únicas at each level. And again, what the Chinese have done is to show how that can be done very nicely. And indeed, you know, Mexico needs to start by cuenta única at the national level, at the federal government level, not three. So in terms of institutional design, so really you're looking at, again, the interaction between policies. And again, I'm using a Mexican example. With the high threshold with the VAT in Mexico, what you had was cheating. And it's this example, which is quite nice, and I'm writing it up. So really this was analysis we did in 2012 before the reform, and then into 2013. We're looking at the information from INEGI and how firms actually cheat. And actually, the larger firms are really responsible to cheat by transacting with smaller firms which were invisible. So a large part of the cheating is large firms. So the assumption that large firms don't cheat was wrong. So what they did was to drop the threshold, integrate the small regime, taxpayer regime, but then that leaves, as I said, it removes the tax handle at the subnational level, the major tax handle. So this is a nice diagram. It's in a book that I did with Brosio on the handbook of multi-level finance, and this looks at institutions. This is the local taxation, shall we say, options. And really what you can have is own source revenue without local tax administration. You don't need tax administration. And this is what the Chinese are now doing. All you need to do is to set a piggyback on the tax rate with the national tax administration, and you have it's an own source revenue. But if you have a local tax administration and they can't vary the rate, it's not an own source revenue. And a shared revenue is not own source revenue. Think of the Simonsen condition. You've got X increasing liabilities has to be matched by your ability to change your revenue base. You can't change a shared revenue base. You can't change transfers, and you can't change other taxes which are actually set by an agreement. So when you talk about own source revenues, you have to be very careful. And this is a mistake that was made in China by some of our colleagues in an international agency that shall not be named, to confuse shared revenues with own source revenues. And then they brought in a system of local government bonds, and it didn't work. It did not solve the debt problem because local governments in China do not have own source revenues. This problem in Mexico. You've got the national tax reform very nicely done, but the states and local governments don't have adequate sources of revenue. So I'm going to move on very quickly. If I can find the changer, I dropped it. I'm going to give you an example. As I said, piggyback can be done very easily on an income tax. You do not need a separate tax administration for a piggyback on the income tax. You got it. You got a very good SAT in Mexico. You do not need another tax administration. That's the main source of revenue for most local governments, state governments, and big metropolitan areas. For cities that you're talking about, small connected cities, the property tax. But what is the property tax you're doing in Latin America? It's a US-type ownership valuation model. It doesn't work outside the US. United Kingdom stopped doing that in the early 1990s because they couldn't figure out the valuation. There were also problems about ownership. They stopped it. China tried that model in Shanghai and Chongqing, and both those experiments failed. India has been running it since 1890, and they collect 0.16 of 1% of GDP. It doesn't work. So is there an alternative? And we say yes. And there's Juan Pablo Jimenez sitting over there. He joined a research agenda. It was presented in the Jornadas with Giorgio Brosio and myself. Giorgio Brosio and I did some work for the European Commission over the last couple of years in Africa, but it also is related to the topic we were presenting this morning in India, is what to do about the property tax. The answer is, go for something simple. This is the Tanzi effect coming in. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. Why do you want to go for these very complex valuation ownership models? Just do it on occupancy linked to local service delivery. Then you get the linkage, the political economy linkage between the tax and service delivery, and that is very powerful. And it can be done overnight. And our estimates in Africa, in a large number of cases, suggest that you can generate between 1 and 2% of GDP very easily. Then you have the access to credit comes through a tax, which is, in Alfred Marshall's term, a beneficial tax, because it's linked to service delivery, suddenly becoming the basis also for access to credit, because suddenly the local governments, where you need the public service delivery, are able to borrow, because if you can't borrow if you don't have a tax base. So really what we're seeing is, this is from the Ahmed Brosio and Jimenez paper in Latin America. It's in the Jornadas from Cartagena. So really, you can get immediate benefits, 1 to 2% of GDP. UK generates 3.5% of GDP with this simplified model. US is 2.6% of GDP. So you can actually do quite well with a simplified model. So, as I said, in Mexico, the problems with the property tax is that there isn't a correspondence because the states set the rates, the local governments do the administration, and then you go to your buddy or your uncle or your aunt is sick and they don't collect anything. So the incentive structures are completely wrong. So it really does not finance, it hinders the creation of sustainable hubs. So you're looking at creation of sustainable hubs, two things. One is that you need to have linkages which are facilitated by the VAT. China has removed the borders around Shenzhen, which is a special economic zone, because they want the linkages. They want the employment generation. But then you need the local financing for local services, which is the other key element. So you've got the national agenda, which is done well in Mexico, subnational agenda, huge amount of work needed. So then you've got, why do you need such a big effort on the cadastre and administration? The argument is, well, you could go the Bogota way, but Bogota did well with the autovolur because it had a tax administration on a functional basis which replicated the national tax administration. They have not been able to replicate the Bogota autovolur system in other parts of Colombia because they don't have that type of administration. So it's very specific requirements for the autovolur type arrangement. So what we are suggesting, of course, is new technology, and there's a lot of potential with blockchain. Blockchain provides full information on every transaction. So if you have full information on every transaction, not only can you simplify who does what, but you're simplifying also the revenue circuit and the treasury circuit. So really the potential of blockchain has to be thought through and is quite revolutionary. in how you do your PFM and how do you do your tax administration. So really, linked to a simplified policy agenda, you can actually very greatly simplify the requirements, and then your capacity constraints disappear. They're out of the window. It can be done in, it can be done in Bolivia. It can be done in the poorest countries in Africa. Why are you worried about it? This can be done, and it then simplifies the way you do your institutional arrangements, which will, of course, vary from country to country, but it's worth looking at. So I think if there's a research agenda, it's this. How does new technology simplify your policy and your administration? The simplification of policy and administration have to go together. So again, there's something therefore, again, I'm not going to have time to go over it. I'm already 1 minute over. Teresa went 5 minutes over. So really, I'll stop by saying that you need, and again, emphasizing Teresa's point, you need overall coordination for the overall revenue and debt limits. This is, again, it's very sensible work done by the IMF and Teresa in particular. But then, do you need a national administration for that? Or do you need local administration? Well, that's a big question. You probably need to de-link the question of administration and accountability. You do not need, that was the sense of that first diagram. You actually don't need local administration for accountability. You just need control of the rates. This happens in this country too, by the way. Then you need coordination on investment design. That's huge. And there's work I did with IDB and Emilio and Axel on Chile. It's work that we had done for Mexico with Jesus Seade and David Cody in the 1980s, and hopefully we can replicate in a research program going forward. It's looking at integrating income distribution, it's looking at integrating employment, it's looking at integrating environmental externalities into your investment strategy. Then how that is implemented requires everything we've talked about: responsibilities, financing, access to credit. It comes together. So sustainable growth agenda, you need a simplified policy framework. You can do with a flat property tax. It can be done very easily. You can do with piggybacks on national income taxes, which was a proposal to Mexico in 2013. Videgaray said he did not have the political space to do that, plus the other major tax reform they carried out. But it's something that the new administration should look at, because you're looking at local provision of employment generation, looking at investments, you're looking at service delivery issues. And then, you're looking at IT and institutions. So I'll stop at that. You can have national Tesoro cuenta únicas, you can have a national tax administration without sacrificing local accountability or autonomy. So I'm being provocative, but I think that's my task as a researcher and an academic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, now we open the floor for questions, comments. Please. Any? One? Someone have? Well, I will ask you while people are taking a few minutes to think about it. I have a question regarding coordination. I think in both presentations you mentioned that it's really important to coordinate with your neighbor states or neighbor municipalities, especially regarding infrastructure. It seems that it's something very difficult to do. So I would like to get your views about what has worked around the world, in other countries, and that could be a good lesson for Latin America.
Yeah, I can say there are a number of examples of effective consortia which are linked among municipalities, which are limited or special purpose for particular sectors. Those are the ones that actually tend to work best because they're sort of organized and consist of specialists in the particular area, and because it's where it's more clear that working together will provide benefits in terms of economies of scale, and ensuring that if there is a network type infrastructures, that they are sort of designed consistently. Brazil has some examples of such things, and in Europe there are many examples of these sort of intermunicipal consortia, which are sector specific, and that work quite well. The OECD, I think Sean probably can mention that, has done some work specific on European OECD countries, and I believe even in the European Commission there are some studies on this particular aspect.
I take a slightly different view. I think these consortia are very, very hard to do, and become impossible if municipalities don't have full information on their assets and liabilities. And quite often, it's particularly in Latin America, that information just doesn't exist. And that's also true in, for example, Spain, where there was quite a lot of irresponsible investment, which was not seen either by the IMF or the Spanish government until the cajas went bankrupt. So, you can get a buildup of liabilities and the gameplay across jurisdictions if you're not careful. You know that France has only just begun requiring balance sheets at the local government level last year. The European Commission recommended it in 2004 following the IPSAS PPP criteria. It was turned down because Germany didn't want it, because German municipalities are full of debt. The German federal government would have gone over Maastricht level treaties, and the German municipalities did not want the liabilities out in the open. I had a big fight last year in a forum with the Berlin finance minister who didn't want his liabilities out there. He said, we know how to manage it. And then I said, don't blame Spain and Greece, for heaven's sakes. You're the ones who didn't allow it to happen. And it's a huge problem in China. It's a huge problem in India. So if you don't know the liabilities in your neighboring jurisdiction, there's no way you're going to collaborate with them. Yeah. So really, you do need to know what you are investing in, what the parameters are, what the shadow prices or the accounting values will be for, say, income distribution, for employment generation. You need that to be decided in a forum, and it depends on the institutional arrangement. In federal countries, it'll probably be a forum of the central federal government and state and local governments. In unitary states, it can be done much more simply, but you do need to have that framework so you don't get conflicting investment decisions. So you have this very nice north-south highway in Chile. It has done nothing for southern Chile or for northern Chile. All it does is makes it easier for people to go to the zona metropolitana, which is where the jobs are. So how do you create the jobs, say, in and around the middle of Chile? Well, that's an issue that we looked at. And using economy-wide shadow prices and looking at the spatial dynamics of hubs. So you're looking at employment, you're looking at groups of population, you're looking at natural resources. You think of it as an expansion of Hausmann's complexity analysis. You're looking at, sort of making best use of the basic criteria. So why isn't there investment in Chiapas is the question. You've got lower wages, you've got lots of people. Question is, you need not only the national connectivity, you need the local public services. You're back to the decentralization issues, which is the quality of public services. Same thing's happening in China. China did not have the connectivity in the 1990s. So they put all their hubs along the coast. They're too big now. They've now got the connectivity with the high-speed trains and the motorways, a bit like southern Italy as well. You've got the high-speed trains, and you've got autostradas. No one invests in southern Italy. They all go to Milan and Rome, where the jobs are. So really the same issue. So just the national connectivity is necessary but not sufficient. You're looking at the local service delivery agenda. You're looking at clean and sustainable cities being generated in, say, Chiapas or Tabasco that will attract the private sector, looking at the private sector doing it, not the public sector. So it has to be attractive for workers, has to be attractive for firms. Then you're looking at then the conditions. So this is a very exciting research agenda, which I think is worth pursuing. And we're certainly doing it in the case of the London School of Economics, together with a consortium of universities in China. We hope to do the same in the Mexican case. So there are lots of other factors.
Governance, security conditions in different parts of
that's the local governance issues.
Just saying that there are low wages is not enough. I mean, what's the productivity in
all of those things are necessary.
These are all factors that affect the
yeah, but you're looking at
not just
but what have they been doing for the last 2 years? They've been creating special economic zones in Chiapas. Has it worked? So really you're looking at a governance structure, which is what you do, how you finance it, and is it sufficient to attract the private sector? Same thing in Western China is a big issue. You know, you've got differences in institutional arrangements, in political systems, but you have the same problem. And it's a question of getting jobs and investment in a coordinated manner to where it's needed. Then you're looking also at the trading relationships and global trading trade shocks, moving from exports to domestic consumption. You've got all sorts of macroeconomic issues, as well as you've got sort of stabilization questions, which are a huge issue, both in Mexico and in China. So I think the Mexico-China examples are actually quite nice because they're facing the same issues.
Thank you very much. Roberto?
Thank you. Very good, both presentations. We are in the same page here. But I have a comment, and I want your comments, both of you. Your analysis is based in an economic analysis, so we agree on that. But also in terms of managed subnational governance, is a very huge problem in terms of politics. First, because when you talk with a mayor or a governor, his time frame is 3 years, 4 years. And that's it. No. Long-term investment. And you mentioned, Teresa, in terms of the selection of the investment, they think what I can open with the table, the presentation to see. And the second problem is when you ask a mayor, and that's my experience, you are going to be more independent if you raise taxes, so you are going to have more manage your own resources. What do you prefer, raise taxes for local or go each week to the central government to ask for more money? You know the answer.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I think I tried to stress in my presentation that the problem of capacity development in subnational governments has a lot to do with governance issues. And because those create the governance in the institutions, including, for example, the term limits on local officials. I did not mention that specifically, but it's one of the factors that affect. These impact very much the incentives of local government to do their job well and efficiently. Okay, so I think that some of the suggestions that I was making have to do really with creating the right incentives. And the central government can do quite a lot in terms of creating the right incentives on sort of an economic basis. Because if it gives more revenue autonomy, it devolves more sources of revenue to the local authorities, and it puts a hard budget constraint, it forces more the local government to use these sources of revenue. The problem is that the nexus between subnational revenue autonomy and the sort of or softness or hardness of the budget constraint is often sort of estimated. Similarly, as regards the design of transfers, when there is a lot of discretionality in transfers, it's of course the name of the game for the local official is to go and try to get more of those transfers, affect the use of that discretionality. If the transfers are more indicators-based, for example, and based on indicators that cannot be manipulated by the local officials, there is, again, more of incentives to exploit its own sources of revenue and to use those revenues in a more efficient manner. So I think that, it is, you said it's economics. Yes, but economics is based on incentives. And I mean, and the incentives are also created by as I said, the local, the institution and the degree of civic accountability that the local officials face.
I totally agree with Teresa. I think it's an excellent answer. I think, if you have a system of transfers whereby local governments can go to the Ministry of Finance at the end of the year and get more money, negotiate, your entire intergovernmental system is completely subverted, completely. So, I mean, you can spend as much money as you want in the decentralized institutions, framework, CIAFs, cadasters, etc. But if this negotiating takes place, it all gets thrown out of the window. The case in Mexico, I think it was in 2010, they decided to give the tenencia, which is the tax on vehicles, to states. And it collapsed. It's a good tax to give to the states. But it went to zero. So it went to race to the bottom. Why? Because at the end of the year, you can always go to Hacienda and ask for more money. Why should you bother with the tenencia? It's an excellent tax and assigned properly to the lower level of government. It just didn't work. So you're absolutely right. The political economy is very important. And I did say that, again, with the model that we started off with, the IDB presentation, also Teresa's, if you have single-term limits, it's shaky because the incentives are wrong. And we've seen that in Mexico. So, with mayors and governors who only incentive is to spend, push the liabilities under the table. It's all happening in China, for heaven's sakes. Because if you are, and then they say, okay, World Bank says you should have performance-based transfers. You should be looking at outcomes. So you have a province of Zhejiang. I teach in Hangzhou, which is the capital of Zhejiang University. It's one of the richest provinces in the country, one of the richest. Very high levels of service delivery, but huge debt. So what are you measuring? If you don't see the debt, you say, Zhejiang has done very well. It's got high levels of educational outcomes. You don't see the debt. You say, promote these guys. They've done very well. You don't see the liabilities. So maybe they're not so good. So really, you do need to have the full information. You do need then the full information. If you don't have full information and you can play games with transfers, there's no point doing anything else because then the system is completely incentive incompatible.
Thank you very much. I think we have another question. Can we take Huáscar? We come to Yeah, okay. I think we come to an end of this session. I think if you have some questions, probably now in the coffee break, you can talk to the panelists. Thank you so much, Teresa and Efisham, for your excellent and provocative presentation. So. So now we have a coffee break. Please come back in 15 minutes.